Explosions rip through the prison as grenades detonate against the wall separating two cell blocks. When the smoke clears, men surge through the gaping hole carrying pistols and machetes and start hunting down other inmates in a brutal rampage. This isn't prison, it's a war zone. Prisons are supposed to be about rehabilitation, but the reality is a lot more violent. On today's episode of the Infographic Show, we're going to take you through the most insane prison fights ever. Number 6. Thai prison fight. You might think that prison fights are spontaneous, and they usually are. But in some countries, they're part of a well-organized tournament run by private organizations. The prisoner's prize? Their freedom. In Thailand, the Department of Corrections launched a policy in partnership with the business's Prison Fight, creating Muay Thai and boxing tournaments for prisoners. It's not as random an idea as it might sound. There is historical precedent for Thai prisoners fighting their way to freedom. Back in 1767, during a brutal war between Burma and Thailand, thousands of Thai soldiers were captured by the Burmese. Instead of being executed or imprisoned indefinitely, they were given a shot at freedom by fighting. However, those were prisoners of war. In Bangkok's Klong Prem prison, the people fighting for their freedom may be behind bars for more legit reasons, like murdering someone. Section 5 of Klong Prem is home to both lifers and inmates with boxing or Muay Thai experience who want to train and compete. Prison guards scout other wings for potential fight candidates. In the world's most depressing draft, prisoners run up and down a long central corridor for cardio, push their limits with basic workout equipment, and even sharpen their skills in a makeshift boxing ring set up inside the facility. Defenders of the system argue that it encourages discipline in prisoners and gives them a general purpose, but for the organization involved in the fights, it seems to be more about entertainment. Prison Fight hosts the full-contact Muay Thai bouts, where inmates are pitted against visiting foreign fighters, outsiders who want to test their skills against hardened criminals. Prisoners must compete in 5 to 8 matches, accounts vary, and if they perform well enough, they might get a reduction on their sentence or even freedom. Anyone who loses a round goes back to the general population. Win all rounds and you can get your very own get-out-of-jail-free card. So how do you schedule an organized fight in prison? Well, attendees need to go through security checks and searches before entering the prison. On the guest list, you'll find fighters, production crew from the Prison Fight show, yes, there is a show, and a handful of select guests, all seated amongst the inmate population. Food and drinks are served, making it feel like a fight night party, except it's behind bars. When the first prisoner steps into the ring, the crowd of inmates watching erupts into fierce cheers. The atmosphere is electric. One of their own is getting a potential shot at freedom. He begins with a ram muay, an elaborate traditional dance that warms the fighter up and shows off his skills, balance, and attitude. Once he's done, his opponent, a fighter from Scotland, steps into the ring. But like most other foreign fighters, he doesn't stand a chance. The inmate is fighting for his freedom. The foreign fighter just signed up for a cool but brutal experience. The inmate easily beats his opponent, winning the fight. The day goes on like that, with bouts of Muay Thai and boxing fights. The prisoners usually win, though not always. The owner of Prison Fight, Estonian businessman Kirill Sukur, bills this as a rehabilitation program. We do this to give the fighters an experience and also to give something back to the country. But the program is very controversial, with many people questioning the logic of making violent offenders even better at fighting. If that's not bad enough, they then release the man most effective at beating others up into society. Not to mention, the severity of their crimes doesn't seem to be taken into consideration. Drug lords, murderers, and hitmen can fight for freedom right alongside those who committed lesser offenses. In fact, people who have longer or life sentences are more incentivized to participate in the program as they see no other way out. Occasionally, however, someone will make an international name for themselves this way. Siraporn Tawisuk won the WBC Female Light Flyweight World Boxing title while behind bars at Klong Prem. At least the organized fights in Thailand have rules, structure, and some level of control. This next one spiraled into chaos and fast. Number 5. A deadly U.S. prison riot. A relatively small event incited one of the deadliest mass prison fights in the last 25 years of U.S. history. On April 15, 2018, in the Lee Correctional Institution in Bishopville, South Carolina, the evening was progressing like any other. Okay, well, there might have been a little tension in the air. People were huddled around the common area known as The Rock, playing cards, watching the NBA playoffs, and generally passing the time. But the prison was dominated by 3 gangs: the Bloods, the Gangster Disciples, and the Crips, who weren't exactly friendly with each other. And that meant the smallest thing could trigger an avalanche of violence. DeMonte Rivera, one of the disciples, entered a cell in the F3 housing unit to rob it. Meanwhile, other inmates acted as lookouts. The cell's resident, Michael Millage, also known as a supplier and possessor of almost everything you could imagine in a prison: drugs, phones, weapons, and money. To this day, no one is sure exactly what motivated the robbery, possibly Millage's TV, contraband, a secret cell phone stash, or just pure boredom, but it went wrong, very wrong. Millage resisted Rivera's intrusion, and in return Rivera pulled out a shank and stabbed him multiple times. Things went downhill from there. A member of the Bloods heard Millage's cries and saw Rivera leaving the cell and went to confront him. Before Rivera could say a word, the inmate stabbed him in the neck, escalating things even further. Almost immediately, armed prisoners rushed in, swarming the common area. Two ran into Millage's cell and saw him bleeding out on the floor, barely breathing. They desperately looked for a guard for help, but the prison was chronically understaffed. Seeing how things were progressing and realizing no guards were coming to calm things down, other inmates fled back to their cells, locking themselves in. Meanwhile, members of the Gangster Disciples and the Crips started hunting down Raymond Scott, one of the highest-ranking Bloods in the prison. They wanted revenge for the stabbing of one of their own, after he had stabbed someone else, of course. But Scott wasn't in the F3 housing unit, so the gang members spread out, overrunning other units, eventually getting to the F5 unit that housed Scott. After spotting him, they pulled out knives and chased him down. Scott and fellow inmate Joshua Jenkins tried to escape, but to no avail. They were murdered in cold blood. All of these events set off a vicious cycle of violence that increasingly spiraled out of control as the night went on. As news of Scott's murder spread, his fellow Bloods decided to chase after any Crips they could find in revenge. They infiltrated the F1 housing unit, one of the closest to the administration buildings, and viciously attacked Crips members living there. Even hardened criminals fled the sudden outburst of violence, running into the other wings or inside of cells to escape. But there was a problem. The metal security doors in the prison had been left unlocked. Doors to cells, doors to various wings were all unlocked, especially in F5, where the locking system slid doors shut using air pressure. The inmates had already figured out how to override it months ago. People fleeing and trying to find shelter in other wings had to hold the metal doors shut against the incoming tide of assailants. They were quickly overwhelmed, with the gang members breaking glass windows and doors to get through to them. Any resistance was quickly extinguished after the rampaging gang members pepper sprayed the inmates. In the midst of all the chaos, Officer Mingo signed into her shift as a prison guard, preparing to be the only guard overseeing a unit containing 256 men. As soon as she walked in, she saw men armed with shanks and axes, aggressive and yelling, pouring out of the B wing. Figuring that 256 men, many of them armed, against one person is pretty bad odds, she ran into the A wing for protection. She sought refuge in the cell of an inmate that she was relatively friendly with. Together, they barricaded her inside the cell for her protection. While locked up, she saw inmates drag DeMonte Rivera's bloody, broken body into the space right in front of her cell. She pleaded for the men to stop, but they casually glanced at her way and told her to just back up. If you come on the wing, you're gonna get killed. By the end of the day, 7 inmates lie dead, with many more injured, a shockingly deadly prison riot within U.S. borders. In addition to the gang rivalries in place in the prison, the government found that understaffing, overcrowding, and general horrible conditions contributed to the violence. In 2021, $92 million was invested into improving the prison. Sometimes it's not the prisoners who instigate the violence. Number 4. San Francisco deputy-led brawls. In 2015, a disturbing allegation about San Francisco's County Jail No. 4 came to light. 4 deputies operating under ringleader Deputy Scott New had forced inmates to engage in gladiator-style fights, but unlike in Thailand, it wasn't for a shot at freedom. This was for the deputies' amusement. In what may come as no surprise, Deputy Scott New had previously been accused of mistreatment of inmates in 2006 and had settled out of court. Deputies selected prisoners they wanted to fight, preferably as uneven a match as possible to make the brawl more entertaining. They approached 150-pound Rico Paliquico Garcia and offered him a deal. Either he fought one of his fellow prisoners, or the deputies would beat him up, cuff him, and tase him all at the same time. According to the inmate's public defender, Jeff Adachi, the men were told there was a hamburger in it for them if they won the fight, so Garcia didn't have many choices. Then they approached the biggest man in the ward, 350-pound Stanley Harris, and offered him a similar deal, except New had already decided that he would bet on Harris, so he wanted to do a little something extra to get the inmate in shape for the fight. He tormented Harris into training and doing constant push-ups. Once, according to Harris, New made him do 200 push-ups within an hour, threatening to assault him the whole time if Harris couldn't do it. The deputies then took the two men up to the 7th floor of the prison, where they had already determined the fight would be staged. They only gave the following rules. Just don't punch the face so no one can basically see the marks, but anything goes other than the face. They also told the prisoners that if they dared seek medical attention for their injuries, the guards would beat them. If they absolutely needed attention, they should say they fell out of their beds. Harris struck a few blows against Garcia, breaking his ribs and bruising him up, but the smaller Garcia managed to get Harris into a headlock, angering New, who had money riding on this after all. Eventually, Harris tapped out. New, enraged, dragged him off to get him to train for round 2, allegedly saying he does not like to lose money. When the allegations were made and the court started investigating the matter, all 4 deputies were put on leave, but the charges were dropped due to a lack of evidence. The 2 inmates involved were transferred to another prison, where New couldn't get to them. Both men also received a $90,000 settlement. The next fight shows that in prison, even the smallest thing can escalate into bloodshed, like Cake Day. Number 3. The Latoral Riots. On September 28, 2021, violence erupted inside one of Ecuador's most infamous prisons, Latoral Penitentiary. Tensions had been building for a while after the infamous leader of the Los Choneros gang, Jorge Luis Zambrano, linked with the Sinaloa drug cartel, had been killed a few months after his release from prison. It led to smaller gangs breaking off from Los Choneros and attacking their former leaders, each of them vying for control. And these fights weren't just being carried out in the streets, but in the prisons themselves. The incident that started the fight was, of all things, a birthday party. At the September 24th, 25th birthday celebration of Junior Roldan, a Los Choneros leader, the gang went around boasting how they were the most powerful gang in the prison. This irritated the gangs that had left them, especially Los Lobos and Los Tigrones. On the morning of September 28th at 9:30 a.m., tensions boiled over. Earlier that week, a drone had dropped a parcel onto the prison patio. Inside was ammunition. Weapons had already been smuggled into the prison for weeks, along with the inmates' food. Ecuador's prison system is chronically understaffed and severely overcrowded, with just 1,500 guards responsible for overseeing 39,000 inmates. So when explosions rocked the facility, blasting holes in the walls of wards 8 and 9, the guards and even the prison cooks didn't stick around to find out what came next. They ran. One account said that Los Choneros in Ward 5 wanted to start the fight, but they had a traitor in their midst. He lobbed grenades at the walls separating them from wards 8 and 9, allowing members of Los Tigrones and Los Lobos to rush in and infiltrate Ward 5. The inmates crawled through holes to get to Los Choneros and then brutally attacked any and all members of the gang they could find. Not content with blowing things up in just one ward, they also crawled through holes to get to wards 1 and 3 and attacked not only Los Choneros members but also inmates caught in the crossfire. If you're wondering why people were sorted into wards by gangs, it's because Ecuador has mostly lost control of its jails. One inmate says when an inmate enters the prison, it's not the guards who decide where he goes, it's the gangs. Using methods associated with Mexican drug cartels, who kill in brutal, horrifying ways to inspire fear, they ran amok through the prison. They killed approximately 35 people during the rampage, injuring 48 others. Police entered the jail to try to regain control, but quickly fled when they saw how chaotic and violent the situation was. 6 cooks in the wing where the fight was happening and 2 officers sustained injuries while fleeing. At this point, pretty much all the administrative personnel had disappeared. The prison was lawless, the inmates had taken control, and they were using it to kill each other. And Los Choneros wasn't going to take this attack lying down. On the same afternoon, they launched a counterattack on Los Tigrones and the other rival gang members. All in all, the fighting lasted almost 2 straight days until the morning of September 30th. President Guillermo Lasso sent in 900 officers and army soldiers to force the inmates into submission and gain control of the prison. In the meantime, relatives of the prisoners gathered outside a nearby morgue to see if any of their loved ones had been caught in the crossfire. People like Zinaida Moreira, whose 23-year-old son had been arrested for stealing chairs, clamored for answers. Surviving inmates with roles of responsibility within the prison tried to help police identify the bodies. Some were so badly burned no one could recognize them. In the end, 118 people died in the September 2021 Latoral riots, with some sources estimating over 120 may have been killed. But anything Ecuador prisoners do, Brazilian prisoners can do too. Number 2. Amazon prison riots. Rival gangs in Brazil often fight for control of the regional drug trade. One day, this fight spilled over into the Anísio Jobim prison complex in Manaus, Brazil, the capital of the Amazon. Familia do Norte, FDN, generally controls the drug trafficking inside Amazonian prison complexes that they're embedded in, including Anísio Jobim. However, they were increasingly being challenged by some new up-and-comers, First Capital Command, or PCC, who usually operate out of São Paulo, and they weren't about to take that lying down. On January 2, 2017, FDN decided to send a message. Starting with a horrific bang, they killed 6 PCC men and threw their bodies over the perimeter fence. And that was just the beginning. The FDN had been importing arms and ammunition through holes in the prison wall for months. The gang members armed themselves and stormed into the cells with PCC members, killing many and taking others hostage. Where were the guards, you might ask? Well, as usual, the prison was understaffed and overcrowded, with 153 prison guards on staff out of the 250 the prison was supposed to employ, and over 1,100 prisoners, almost triple the prison's capacity. Some were terrified and gave up on trying to control the situation. 12 of them were taken hostage. In fact, FDN took 74 inmates hostage as well, holding them for 17 hours so they could continue to assert their dominance over the prison. They shot and choked men to death, burned their bodies, and littered the prison yard with them. In the meantime, prisoners at a linked prison, the Antonio Trinidade Penal Institute, decided to take advantage of the mayhem going on in the neighboring jail. While authorities were figuring out how to control the gang fight at Anísio Jobim, 72 of the prisoners at Antonio Trinidade escaped. Though 40 were recaptured, the rest were nowhere to be found. Security tried to enter Anísio Jobim, but decided the situation was too unpredictable. Eventually, after the FDN had wiped out rivals and sent a message to other gang competitors, the hostages were freed and authorities were allowed to enter peacefully. Many of those who caused the disturbance were transferred to federal penitentiaries. After 17 hours of fighting and rioting, 56 people lay dead. Amazonas Public Safety Secretary Sergio Fontes said the inmates had established with the administration a promise that everything would run smoothly throughout the holidays and there wouldn't be any problems. They didn't keep their promise, but you can't expect much from criminals, can you? Considering more people were killed in 2 other riots in the next 2 weeks, the answer is no, you probably can't expect much. But what about fights in women's prisons? They can't be as bad, right? Number 1. The Tamara Prison Riot. Prisons in Central America are a whole other world of violence. Gangs control them more often than the guards, and the governments don't seem to be able to get a handle on them. And that doesn't just apply to men's prisons. One of the most horrific and violent prison fights happened in the Women's Center of Social Adaptation in Honduras, often simply referred to as Tamara Prison. As with the other fights, prisoners had been smuggling in guns, explosives, blades, and ammunition for years with little difficulty. Later, Honduran President Xiomara Castro alleged that this was likely happening with the help of the guards working in the prison. The inmates at Tamara lived in fear of one group particularly, the Barrio 18 gang. Barrio 18 is one of the most feared youth gangs in the Western Hemisphere, and a rival to the more well-known MS-13, a rivalry that led to this prison fight in the first place. The groups are known as maras, gangs that started in the US and had their influence and members spread to Latin America. In Tamara Prison, which houses members of both Barrio 18 and MS-13, tensions had been escalating for weeks in mid-2023. Joana Paulo Soriano Uceda, whose mother and sister were in the prison, said her relatives told her Barrio 18 members were out of control. They were fighting with them all the time. That was the last time we talked. Another civilian said her friend who was in the prison, Alejandra Martinez, had told her right before the fight that the Barrio 18 people had threatened them that they were going to kill them if they didn't turn over a relative. And on June 20th, 2023, some members of the Barrio 18 gang decided to make good on their threats. They loaded up their weapons, 18 pistols, an assault rifle, 2 machine pistols, and at least 2 grenades, and got ready for an all-out assault on the MS-13 members locked in the same prison complex. Soon after, they barged into and took control of Cell Block 1, the home of many MS-13 members. The Barrio 18 gang started shooting inmates they came across and attacking them with machetes. Cells were set alight regardless of who was inside them. It was a relentless and bloody attack. A group of inmates were so desperate that they made a hole in the prison roof. Unfortunately, the plan to escape didn't end up working. They dropped back down into the cell, and Barrio 18 inmates immediately unleashed a barrage of gunfire into their cell. By some miracle, one of the inmates survived. When later recounting her story, she said she looked up and saw the wall right behind her riddled with bullet holes, dead and dying bodies around her. Another prisoner, Wendy, said while seeing her friends and fellow inmates taken down by gunfire all around her, no one helped. So where were the guards? Well, they were most likely helping Barrio 18 move between cells to kill people more efficiently. According to President Castro, at the end of this particular prison riot, the state counted 46 victims. 7 other women were sent for treatment for knife and bullet wounds to a nearby hospital. Not a single guard was injured or seemingly even targeted, which is perhaps why President Castro fired them all after the riot, replacing them with an elite special police unit. Perhaps uncoincidentally, Tamara has experienced no further riots of this scale to date. Which prison fight shocked you the most? Do you think these violent outbreaks are the result of broken systems or something more? Drop your thoughts in the comments. In the meantime, check out 50 things nobody tells you about being in prison, or this other one right over there.